The wind cut across the Montana ranchlands like a quiet warning, sharp enough that clarity slipped away from Ethan Miller's mind just when he needed it most. The herd had stalled along a wide curved path, refusing to move after a restless night. A storm brewed behind the ridge, dark and impatient, and Ethan felt his purpose tested in a way he hadn't expected this early in winter. He stood beside an old oak tree, its broad branches carrying the weight of decades, stability, stewardship, and decisions made by men who held their word with integrity. But today, leadership didn't feel noble. It felt heavy, confusing, unsteady. Behind him, a young ranch hand named Cole waited for direction, eyes uncertain, boots shifting in the cold dirt. Ethan knew that hesitation, lack of focus, lack of direction was contagious. A leader who faltered could scatter the spirits of an entire crew, and for the first time since his father passed the ranch to him, Ethan wondered if he truly carried the inner strength to guide others with wisdom, discipline, and emotional maturity. A low bellow came from the cattle, uneasy, sensing the tension. Even the animals seemed to question whether Ethan had the resilience to stand firm. A gust pushed against him, a wind shift, subtle but insistent, reminding him that storms don't wait for a man to collect his thoughts. He tightened the worn rope in his hands, a symbol of the discipline his father always said defined a leader more than titles or pride. Yet at this moment, the rope felt like a question instead of an answer. Ethan swallowed hard. There was a decision he had avoided for months, one that held the power to reshape the ranch, the crew, and his own future. But it didn't start there. We must go back a little in time. Long before the storm, before the hesitation on the wide, curved path, Ethan's mornings unfolded with a rhythm that echoed across the quiet Montana ranchlands. He rose before sunrise, when the sky was still a muted wash of gray and the world felt suspended between yesterday's lessons and today's possibilities. The air carried the faint scent of frost and pine, and each morning he paused for a breath of intentional living, letting the stillness carve out space for clarity. His father, Daniel Miller, had once said, "A man who starts his day in silence ends it with direction." Ethan held onto those words with the same steadiness he used to hold the old lantern that guided him through early chores. That lantern, dented, dependable, symbolized not just light but discipline, consistency, and the steady character required to steward a ranch through harsh seasons. The land around him stretched wide, peaceful yet demanding. A single strong fence line followed the rolling hills, a reminder that boundaries were not just for cattle, but for a man's own thoughts and responsibilities. Beyond the fence, the horizon glowed faintly with the promise of dawn, a horizon glowing with light, whispering of purpose and long-term vision. Cole hadn't arrived yet back then. At that time, it was just Ethan, two older ranch hands, and the unspoken weight of stepping into his father's boots after Daniel's health began to falter. Leadership had not been handed to Ethan in ceremony. It had quietly settled on him like Montana snow, soft at first, then heavy, then impossible to ignore. Despite the simplicity of the routine, feeding the cattle, checking the water lines, walking the perimeter, Ethan could feel a pressure building beneath the surface of his days. Decisions waited for him at every turn. Small ones, yes, but meaningful. Decisions that required not just effort, but strategic thinking and emotional maturity. One morning, while walking along the fence line with his gloves stiff from the cold, Ethan stopped at the familiar shape of the old oak tree. It stood alone on a slight rise, its enormous roots gripping the earth like a guardian that refused to be moved by time or weather. His father used to pause there, resting one hand against the bark as if the tree itself offered counsel. Ethan did the same now. The bark was rough beneath his palm, grounding, honest. A light mist hovered across the lower fields that day, mist lifting, slowly revealing the land with gentle clarity. Ethan took it as a sign that maybe he, too, was meant to uncover a new layer of direction. But clarity does not always come easily, and even then, a whisper of doubt clung to him. The ranch hands had been watching him more closely lately, not with judgment, but with expectation. They needed leadership that was steady, not reactive, wise, not hesitant. Ethan knew this. He wanted to rise to it. Yet every time he prepared to make a definitive choice about the ranch's future, modernizing equipment, restructuring teams, or adjusting winter strategy, the weight of responsibility pressed harder. One particular afternoon, while repairing the east water trough, Ethan overheard the older men talking. They didn't know he was close enough to listen. "Good kid," one said. "Hard-working. But leadership? That takes more than good intentions." "Yeah," the other replied. "Daniel always said leadership is about clarity under pressure. I'm not sure Ethan's found his footing yet." Their words tightened something in Ethan's chest. Not anger, just a deep acknowledgement of truth. They weren't being cruel. They were naming the shadow he had been wrestling quietly. That same evening, a restless horse in the barn kicked its stall. Ethan approached calmly, placing a steady hand on its neck. The animal trembled but began to settle, responding to his presence. Moments like that taught Ethan something important. Leadership wasn't about force. It was about inner strength, stability, and the courage to steady others even when your own spirit felt unsteady. But the deeper trial, the one that would define the months ahead, had not yet emerged. It would come later, slowly at first, like the shifting wind that sweeps across open land before a storm. And Ethan would be forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that leadership demands both resilience and the humility to grow. For now, though, he walked back toward the house as the mist fully lifted. The sun broke over the horizon, scattering gold across the fields, and he felt the faint stirrings of purpose rising again within him. He didn't yet know how fiercely that purpose would be tested. He didn't know what decisions would soon demand his courage, but the land already sensed it. The wind already carried the foreshadowing, and the quiet strength within him, though not fully awakened, was waiting. Ethan's dream did not arrive in a single flash of brilliance. It formed slowly, like sunrise easing its way over the Montana ridgeline. In the months after stepping into his father's role, he began to sense a deeper calling, something beyond daily chores, beyond keeping the ranch afloat. It was a quiet but persistent tug toward purpose, toward leading with greater clarity, and toward building something that would outlast him. Most evenings, he would walk out to the wide, curved path that wrapped gently along the pasture's edge. From there, he could see the entire spread, the barns, the grazing herds, the single long fence line, the silhouette of the old oak tree standing like a guardian of legacy. The horizon often glowed faintly with fading light, a horizon glowing with light, promising direction even as night approached. Those moments awakened something inside him, a vision, a dream that felt both humble and profound. He wanted to transform the ranch into a place built not just on hard labor, but on integrity, wisdom, and long-term stewardship. A place where younger ranch hands like Cole could learn discipline, leadership, and emotional maturity, traits that shaped a man far more than his skill with cattle or machinery. But Ethan's dream reached further than operations or efficiency. What he longed for was a ranch that taught character, a ranch where people left better than they arrived, a ranch where storms, literal or personal, became training grounds for resilience rather than reasons to quit. Still, Ethan knew dreams required more than passion. They demanded strategic thinking, focus, and the courage to act even when clarity flickered. So one quiet evening, with the sky deepening into indigo, he settled beside the oak tree and pulled the worn rope from his pocket. his father's old training rope, frayed from decades of use. Holding it gently, he whispered a small prayer, not dramatic, not spoken for anyone to hear. Just a quiet request for guidance, for discernment, for the strength to grow into the leader the ranch needed. "Show me how to lead with purpose," he murmured, "and help me become a man worthy of others' trust." The wind shifted softly, brushing the grass toward him, a subtle sign, simple yet comforting. Ethan closed his eyes and allowed the moment to sink into his heart. He knew achieving this dream would take consistency, resilience, and a willingness to confront his own weaknesses. But he also sensed something else, divine timing weaving its way through his days, preparing him for trials he could not yet see. Later that week, Ethan gathered the ranch hands for a meeting. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, a steadiness born from dream-driven conviction. "I want this ranch," he said, "to stand as a place of responsibility, clarity, and growth, not just for the cattle, but for us, for our character, for the legacy we build." The men nodded, some surprised, some thoughtful. Most had never heard Ethan speak with such direction before. Something in his tone hinted at the leader he was becoming, still unpolished, still unsure at times, but grounded in purpose. Yet with every dream comes resistance, and where purpose grows, pressure follows. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the first true test of his internal leadership was already gathering like a storm on the distant ridge. His dream was set. Now it would be refined. Winter came early that year, pressing down on the Montana ranchlands with a severity Ethan had not anticipated. The cold arrived with a sharpness that made even seasoned ranch hands mutter under their breath. Frost clung stubbornly to fence posts, and the ground hardened into an unforgiving surface that resisted every step, every plan, every intention. For Ethan, the shift in weather mirrored the shift inside his own heart. What had once felt like growing confidence now trembled under the weight of responsibility. His dream, noble, clear, anchored in purpose, began to collide with the quiet doubts that had lived in the corners of his mind for years. Leadership, he discovered, wasn't born in meetings or in ideal visions. It was shaped in the unseen hours, the lonely decisions, the cold mornings when even the sunrise felt far away. One morning, before the crew arrived, Ethan walked out along the wide, curved path with his hands tucked deep into his jacket pockets. The sky was a muted blue, the horizon dim but promising light, yet no clarity came. Not today. Today felt heavy, and the ranch seemed to sense it. At the edge of the pasture stood the old oak tree, its branches crusted with frost. A thin mist hovered low, mist lifting, slowly revealing the land beneath. But unlike before, the lifting mist didn't bring peace. It only exposed more of what was weighing on him. The cattle were restless this season. Feed supplies were tighter than expected. One of the wells near the north pasture froze solid overnight, and the ranch hands, though hard-working, were beginning to feel the strain of Ethan's inconsistent decisions. They needed direction. They needed clarity. They needed a leader steady enough to be trusted. And Ethan wasn't sure he was that man. He paused near the oak tree, leaning one shoulder against the trunk. The bark felt colder than usual. Even grounding symbols can feel distant when the internal storm grows. "This shouldn't be this hard," he whispered into the quiet. But leadership, true leadership, the kind his father lived, was always hard. Ethan knew that. Still, knowing it didn't make the weight easier to carry. Later that morning, as he checked the water lines, Ethan accidentally snapped a brittle pipe valve. A rush of icy spray shot upward, soaking his gloves and chilling his hands to the bone. He cursed under his breath, something he rarely allowed himself to do, and dropped to his knees to control the leak. The cold bit through him, The frustration burned deeper. As he wrestled with the valve, he heard footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. Cole approached slowly, hat pulled low, breath rising in soft white clouds. "Need a hand, Ethan?" he asked. Ethan's pride flared before his reason. "No, I've got it." Cole stepped back, but not far. Ethan could feel the young man's eyes on him, full of concern, not just for the valve, but for the growing strain Ethan couldn't hide anymore. In that moment, the real internal trial surfaced. Ethan wasn't simply struggling with the ranch, he was struggling with himself, with the old habits of self-doubt, with fear of failure, with the pressure of living up to a legacy built by a man whose confidence had seemed effortless. The pipe finally gave way, the leak slowing to a stop. Ethan sat back on his heels, chest tight, breath sharp. He felt the ache of exhaustion, not from physical labor, but from emotional burden. Leadership demanded inner strength, discipline, and unwavering consistency. Yet lately Ethan felt like he was unraveling at the seams. That afternoon, clouds gathered over the ridge, thick and dark. The wind shifted, carrying the bite of an approaching storm. Ethan stood near the barn, watching the sky tighten, watching the cattle cluster nervously, watching his crew glance his way for direction he couldn't seem to give. Every decision felt like a test he was failing. Should he move the herd now, or wait? Should he close off the east pasture despite the feed shortage? Should he call his father for advice, knowing that would reveal how deeply he was struggling? Each question stirred another wave of self-doubt. His long-term vision blurred beneath the weight of immediate problems. His purpose felt distant, his clarity clouded. As the first snowflakes drifted down, Ethan stepped away from the barn and walked out alone, boots crunching across the frozen ground. He crossed the pasture until he reached the far board of the fence line, the boundary his father used to say symbolized a man's values, how far he was willing to go, and what he refused to compromise. There, finally, Ethan allowed himself to feel everything he had been resisting. He leaned forward, hands gripping the fence rail, and bowed his head. A short breath, then another. His shoulders trembled, not from the cold, but from the quiet pressure of leadership testing the deepest parts of his character. "Lord," he whispered, barely audible, "I'm trying, but I don't know if I'm leading well. I don't know if I'm strong enough." The wind stirred, brushing lightly past him. Not an answer, just a reminder that storms were never meant to be faced on pride alone. As snow thickened around him, Ethan felt something shift inside. Not clarity, not yet, but a sobering realization. Leadership isn't proven by moments of inspiration. It's forged in seasons when a man must choose discipline over discouragement, integrity over ease, and resilience over the instinct to withdraw. This was his internal trial, the quiet battle that would shape every decision to come. And though he didn't yet see the path forward, the struggle itself was preparing him. The storm would intensify, circumstances would tighten, and an injustice he never saw coming would soon test him even more deeply. But for now, Ethan stood alone at the fence line, a man in the cold, a heart under pressure, a leader in the making. The storm that followed Ethan's internal struggle did not arrive with roaring drama. It came quietly at first, a steady snowfall, a slow tightening of the wind, a cold that bit deeper each day. But the true storm, the one that would test Ethan's leadership, integrity, and emotional maturity, came not from the sky, but from a man named Travis Hargrove. Travis had worked on the ranch for 6 years, older than Ethan by a decade, sharp-minded and quick with numbers. He had gained a reputation among the hands for being efficient, persuasive, and dangerously confident. Ethan's father had once warned him, "Travis is useful, son." But usefulness without character becomes ambition in disguise. At the time, Ethan hadn't fully understood. Now he would. It began when Ethan overheard the crew discussing feed distribution behind the barn. "Travis says we should move everything to the south pasture," one of the hands said. He said Ethan agreed to it, another added. But Ethan hadn't agreed. In fact, he had decided the opposite. That afternoon, Ethan confronted Travis near the equipment shed. Snow dusted the man's shoulders, and he stood with a smug calmness Ethan instantly recognized as rehearsed. "I heard you've been giving orders using my name," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. Travis didn't flinch. "Not orders, suggestions. The men need direction. You seemed overwhelmed lately." The words landed like a slap. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, but he held on to discipline. "Leadership isn't something you take when it's convenient, Travis, and it's not something you manipulate." Travis shrugged, gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Someone has to make decisions. Storms coming, feeds low. You're hesitating." It stung because it carried a grain of truth, but twisted truth is the cruelest kind. Ethan stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. "If you have concerns, you bring them to me, not the crew." Travis smiled thinly, just trying to help. But Ethan knew better. This wasn't help, this was positioning. Over the next week, small cracks widened. Travis adjusted the scheduling chart without permission. He reallocated feed supplies in the storage barn. He spoke to 2 neighboring ranches about equipment rentals, all under Ethan's name. Yet every time Ethan addressed him, Travis maintained that silky, calculated tone. "I thought it was what you wanted. You weren't clear." The men seemed confused. The injustice simmered, slow and corrosive. Ethan felt his inner strength tested at every turn. He wrestled with anger, frustration, and the fear that maybe Travis was right. Maybe he was failing as a leader. The burden of uncertainty made each decision feel heavier, but something deeper held him steady. The quiet insistence that purpose and integrity must guide him, even when clarity wavered. One late afternoon, as the sun set behind snow-thick clouds, Ethan stood beside the old oak tree, breath fogging in the cold. He watched the crew from a distance. Travis walked among them with the confidence of a man gathering followers. Ethan felt the weight of a breakthrough forming, painful but necessary. Leadership wasn't about avoiding conflict, it was about confronting it with wisdom. The breaking point arrived when Ethan discovered that Travis had redirected the cattle early, hours before the storm, without informing him. The herd had been pushed toward the narrower ravine path, a route Ethan never used during winter because ice formed quickly there. When Ethan reached the ravine, he saw the danger instantly. The cattle crowded against the steep sides, hooves slipping on frozen patches. A few animals trembled, uncertain, fearful. Cole ran up to him, breathless. "Travis told us you approved it," he said. "Said you wanted them moved before the storm hit." Ethan's stomach dropped. This wasn't a mistake. It was manipulation. And now it jeopardized the herd, the ranch, and the crew's trust. Ethan took control with calm urgency, giving clear, steady instructions. "Cole, circle wide. Keep pressure light. Nobody push from the back. Let them move on their own." The crew responded instantly. Even amid fear and confusion, Ethan's voice carried the clarity they needed. Slowly, carefully, the herd shifted back to safer ground. Only once the last cow was secure did Ethan allow himself a breath, and then he went to find Travis. Travis stood near the barn, brushing snow from his gloves as though he had done nothing wrong. Ethan approached with the quiet firmness of a man who finally understands the trial set before him. "You lied," Ethan said. No anger in his voice, just truth. "You put the herd at risk. You put the crew at risk." Travis scoffed. "I made a decision you were too afraid to make. They follow me because I act." "No," Ethan replied, stepping closer, eyes steady. "They follow you because you're loud. Loud isn't leadership. Loud is insecurity wearing confidence." Travis stiffened. "You want control," Ethan continued, "but leadership requires integrity, stewardship, character, none of which you're showing." For the first time, Travis's composure cracked. "You're not your father," he snapped. "Everyone sees it. You're soft. You can't make hard calls. Someone has to take charge." Ethan felt the words slice deep, but they no longer shook him. "I'm not trying to be my father," Ethan said quietly. "I'm trying to be a man who leads with wisdom, not ego. And that means this ends now." Silence settled between them, heavy and cold. "You're done making decisions," Ethan told him. "From now on, you report every action to me. And if you step out of line again, I'll release you. I mean it." Travis's jaw tightened. His eyes shifted with the calculation of a man who realizes his influence is slipping. "This ranch needs strength," he growled. "It does," Ethan said. "And strength is not manipulation. Strength is responsibility." The wind shifted then, sharp, cold, pushing snow across the yard. Even nature seemed to underline Ethan's words. Travis turned away, furious but silent. The battle wasn't over. Ethan knew it. Ambition doesn't surrender easily. But this confrontation marked a turning point. Ethan had stood his ground, not with anger, but with maturity and clarity. The crew saw it. Cole especially saw it. And though Travis would soon attempt one last act of cunning, the fall of the unjust was already being written by the consequences of his own character. The days that followed the confrontation settled heavy across the ranch, like the quiet after a storm that hasn't fully finished speaking. The snow deepened, winds sharpened, and the Montana landscape seemed to brace itself, but something else braced too. Ethan's resolve. His stance had changed. The crew felt it. Cole felt it. Even the cattle moved with a calmer rhythm when he approached. Only Travis resisted the shift. He kept working, but the subtle manipulation, the whispered half-truths, the strategic positioning grew weaker. His confidence had cracked, and without the illusion of authority he'd crafted, the men watched him differently now. Ambition without integrity loses its shine quickly. Yet Travis wasn't finished. His final downfall came through a choice that exposed him, not because anyone caught him, but because character always reveals itself in time. On a morning colder than any before, the crew discovered the feed truck stuck in a deep snowbank near the far south pasture. The path leading to it was narrow and winding, a stretch Ethan had told everyone to avoid until the thaw. But someone had taken the truck anyway. When Ethan and Cole arrived, they found Travis pacing beside the vehicle, muttering curses into the frozen air. The tires had spun so deeply into the drift that the undercarriage rested in snow. Cole shot Ethan a questioning look. Ethan didn't need an explanation. He already knew. "What happened?" Ethan asked. Travis didn't meet his eyes. "I was trying to get ahead on feed routes. The crew's been slow, thought I'd move things forward. But the tracks told the real story. They showed hesitation, circles, multiple attempts. A man wrestling with himself, not with duty." Ethan walked around the truck, examining the ruts. Travis shifted uneasily. "This wasn't strategy," Ethan said quietly. "This was you trying to prove you're in control. Even after I told you the boundaries." Travis stiffened. Someone needed to make a call. Ethan straightened, facing him fully. Leadership doesn't break boundaries to prove a point. Leadership protects boundaries to protect people. The wind cut across the pasture, carrying the cold truth between them. Travis's jaw tensed. His voice rose with frustration edged by desperation. "You don't see it. You're weak. You hesitate. You pray your way through decisions like that will fix anything." Ethan didn't react, not with anger, not with defense. His voice remained steady, anchored in the inner strength he'd been building since the first snowfall. "I pray," he said softly, "because wisdom doesn't come from pride, and because a man who refuses accountability eventually destroys everything he touches." Those words landed with the weight of a fallen tree. Travis's face hardened, but beneath the anger something else flickered. Fear. the kind that appears when a man realizes he is the architect of his own consequences. When the crew gathered later that afternoon, Ethan explained the decision calmly, openly. "Travis will be leaving the ranch at the end of the week," he announced, "not because of one mistake, but because leadership requires integrity, and integrity can't survive deceit." The men nodded. Not one protested. Not even Travis spoke a word. They had seen it now, the difference between clarity and cunning, between strength and manipulation, between a man who stood for responsibility and a man who pushed for control. Ethan didn't humiliate him. He didn't lecture him. He simply upheld the boundary a leader must hold. Travis gathered his things in silence. No dramatic exit, no final strike. His downfall came not from Ethan, but from the slow collapse of his own character. As he drove away, the ranch seemed to exhale. Even the cattle stood quieter, snowfall softening the world around Ethan as if acknowledging the moment. Character outlasts cleverness, integrity defeats ambition, and wisdom protects what pride destroys. The unjust had fallen, not by force, not by revenge, but by consequence. Ethan watched the horizon glowing faintly with afternoon light and felt something shift inside him. He was ready now, not perfect, not finished, but ready for what came next. The morning after Travis left, the Montana ranchlands greeted Ethan with a silence that felt different, cleaner, more honest, like the land itself had been waiting for a shift in clarity. Snow still blanketed the ground, but the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed in pale gold. It was the kind of morning that reminded a man that even the hardest seasons eventually soften. Ethan rose before the sun, boots crunching in the cold as he stepped outside. A faint horizon glow promised warmth that had not yet arrived, but its light carried purpose. Direction, hope. The ranch breathed with a quiet steadiness he had not felt in weeks. He walked toward the wide, curved path, his breath rising in tiny clouds. The cattle stood peacefully, their earlier tension gone. One older cow, the same one that had nearly slipped in the ravine, lifted her head as Ethan approached. She stood tall, calm, an animal standing again, restored. He took it as a sign of the ranch's returning stability. Cole joined him a few moments later. "Feels different today," the young hand said softly. "It does," Ethan replied, "like something reset." They stood together in the cold, watching the first hints of sunrise spill across the land. The mist lifted from the lower fields, revealing everything with renewed clarity. A gentle wind shift brushed against them, warmer than before, carrying not threat, but reassurance. Ethan felt it deep in his chest. The internal storm had passed. The injustice had fallen. Integrity had held. Now came something else, something holy, quiet, exact in its timing. As the sun rose fully, the horizon exploded into golden warmth, a golden horizon that felt almost like a blessing poured directly over the ranch. The light touched the fence line, the barns, the oak tree, and finally Ethan himself. And then came the moment he didn't expect. Ethan reached the old oak tree, placing his hand against the familiar bark. But today the tree felt different, alive with legacy, strength, and divine reassurance. He closed his eyes. For the first time in months, no doubts pushed in, no second guessing, no fear of failing, just a deep inner stillness born from resilience, discipline, and a character strengthened through trial. A soft voice rose inside him, not audible, not dramatic, but unmistakably clear. "You were never leading alone." His breath caught. Emotional maturity, forged through difficulty, allowed him to feel the truth without resisting it. The weight he had been carrying eased in an instant, like snow sliding from a heavy branch. Ethan nodded, whispering his gratitude. "Thank you for your timing." The wind shifted again, circling him gently as if in response. Cole approached quietly. "What now, Ethan?" Ethan opened his eyes and looked across the ranch. His father's legacy, his responsibility, his training ground. But now, for the first time, he saw not a burden, but a calling shaped by divine timing. "Now," he said, voice steady, "we rebuild with clarity, with consistency, with long-term vision." Cole smiled. "You sound like a man who knows where he's going." Ethan shook his head softly. "Not always, but I know who guides the timing." He turned toward the horizon again, the golden light spreading wider, brighter, stronger. The land itself seemed to glow with renewed purpose. Even the still pond near the northwest pasture, normally frozen solid, reflected the rising sun with a surprising shimmer of still water, peace distilled into a single image. Ethan felt the blessing fully now, not as luck or coincidence, but as spiritual growth born from the exact moment he chose integrity over pride. And then he spoke the words that sealed the climax. God never arrives late. The truth rang through him with a warmth deeper than the sun, stronger than the wind, more grounding than the oak tree itself. Every hardship, every doubt, every injustice had been shaping him for this moment of breakthrough. He stood straighter, felt stronger, not perfect but aligned, not certain of every decision, but certain of the one who guided his steps. The ranch hands would later say something changed in Ethan that day. They saw a leader, not because he demanded respect, but because he embodied it. A man whose wisdom came not from pride, but from perseverance. A man whose clarity came from walking through darkness. A man whose purpose came from learning to wait for divine timing. And as the golden horizon expanded across the Montana ranchlands, Ethan felt gratitude rise inside him like a second sunrise. The blessing had arrived, quiet, precise, powerful, and right on time. In the months that followed, the Montana ranchlands carried a new steadiness, one shaped not by perfect circumstances, but by a leader who had learned to walk with clarity, purpose, and integrity. Ethan often reflected on how quietly transformation arrives, how storms shape a man long before the blessing becomes visible. He understood now that leadership is less about commanding others and more about commanding one's own character, holding fast to direction when doubts whisper, protecting boundaries when ambition tempts, and trusting divine timing when the path grows dim. The oak tree remained his silent mentor, its branches stretching wide with the wisdom of years. The wide curved path became a symbol of intentional living, guiding him each morning toward focus and responsibility. Even the fence line reminded him that strength is found in consistency, not in noise. And as seasons passed, Ethan carried a simple truth into every decision, every moment of stewardship, every quiet prayer offered at dawn. Leadership begins the moment a man chooses integrity. Those who plant in faith harvest clarity. Often, God strengthens a man before he blesses him. His trials had not broken him, they had built him. And they had taught him the timeless wisdom that anchored his soul. God never arrives late. When Ethan finally understood that God never arrives late, something in him settled, an inner strength, a quiet clarity, a purpose shaped by storms that once felt unbearable. And maybe that's where you are now, standing in your own winter season, wondering if timing has forgotten your name. But hear this. Breakthrough often begins the moment you refuse to quit, the moment you choose integrity over impulse, wisdom over fear, long-term vision over temporary pressure. If this story spoke to something inside you, then don't walk away, lean in. This channel is where we grow in purpose, discipline, and spiritual maturity together. Subscribe and step into a community that believes clarity returns, storms end, and God's timing is always perfect. Now, there's another story waiting for you. Tap the video on your screen and keep walking the path.